Good morning, everybody, or at least it's morning in Toronto. It's probably even earlier morning in Vancouver and across the land. Welcome to our first KTE-CoP webinar. First time we've come at our membership with a webinar. My name is Melanie Barwick. I'm one of the members of the, I think we call ourselves an organizing committee. A little bit about KTE-CoP. We're on the web at KTECOP.ca. We have been in existence since 2006, we're figuring. On and off with some funding to bring to you some speakers and to survey the climate of knowledge translation across Canada. So today we have Matthew McKean from the Conference Board of Canada and our very own David Phipps from York University speaking to you about knowledge mobilization, research impact, and the changing nature of academic work. We have 30 participants on the line, and perhaps other people will join us. I think everybody has the capability to mute their audio, and if you'd like to know a little bit more about Matthew and David, their bios are on our website, again at KTECOP.ca. David's going to start. He's going to speak for about 25 minutes or so, and then Matthew's going to move along, and we'll have some time for discussion at the end. So David, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Melanie. Thank you, Annalise and Stacy, for supporting this. Thank you, Matthew, for taking off your cardigan and matching me with my jacket off. You see the slide in front of you with the agenda today. And throughout this webinar, we have embedded polls, so we do expect the audience to be interactive. If you can, answer the polls. If you have a question, please type it in the lower right-hand side. Annalise or Stacy, if you could keep your eye on that box, because I'll be, Matthew and I will be in midstream, and if you could just interrupt us when there is a question to be posed. And we will also pause along the way and then pause at the end for opportunities for comments. So this presentation arises out of a piece of research that Matthew did that he'll speak about, but it was on knowledge mobilization and the Research Impact Network and the changing nature of academic work. And we were together at the Conference Board of Canada's Post-Secondary Education and Skills Summit last week, where this paper was launched, and we thought it would be an interesting time and an interesting subject to bring it to the community to share with you our thinking of where knowledge mobilization might be going from an academic institution perspective, and what might the implications of that be on scholarship both and employment within the university setting. So I'm going to start, and I've got a handful of slides where I'm going to talk about research impact with some examples from the Research Impact Network, and talk about how we see knowledge mobilization as being one of the ways that we can maximize the economic, environmental, and social impacts of research, and then talk a little bit about the Research Impact Network itself. And you can see the 12 university logos on the bottom of the slide that represent the current members of the network. So just to give you an example of one of the impact stories arising from the work of the members of this network, at McMaster University, there's a researcher, Wayne Luchuk, who was working with the United Way Toronto and New York region, working since 2008 with universities and municipalities, and they've been working as a poverty research group. And they got some SSHRC funding and worked together, and then produced this report in 2013 called It's More Than Poverty. And many academics would stop at that report and they say, we're done. We'll publish it in the peer-reviewed literatures. We've done a report, and they'll say, we're done. But that's not good enough. If we actually want to create impact, we have to help our academics and their non-academic partners move beyond dissemination. And so some of the knowledge mobilization strategies that were employed in this were stakeholder engagement, knowledge brokering, planning for communications, and collaborating between academic and non-academic partners. And part of the stakeholder engagement that they did was working with the provincial government. And when the provincial government in 2014 released Bill 18, which was the Stronger Workplaces for a Stronger Economy Act, this research in this group was cited in that legislation when they were announcing the legislation, and it's been referred to almost 50 times in the House of Commons and various other government bodies. So this illustrates how if we're going to create impacts of research, we need to move beyond dissemination. We need to facilitate the uptake of that research and that evidence and engage that expertise with decision makers so that it can get out of the labs or out of the studios or out of the offices and into the hands of decision makers who can use this. So I'm going to ask, this is our first poll, our first audience poll. Are you excited? I hope so. So this is, what do you call this stuff that we do? I want to find out from you guys. What do you call it? Click all that may apply, and please start now. Excellent. So we're seeing a lot of folks in knowledge translation, which suggests a health-heavy audience, certainly in Canada. Annalise, can you expand the screen a little bit? I'm not seeing the bottom of the poll. Thank you. Perfect. And if that's great, thank you everyone. Annalise, if you could end the poll. Poll is now closed. So we see a lot of folks that are using knowledge translation, with the second in line being knowledge mobilization, third being knowledge transfer and exchange, and some folks, one respondent has used others. So if that one respondent could type in the lower right-hand chat box, tell us what is the word that you use to describe this, to describe the work that you do. Thank you, Natalie. Well, research valorization. Are you from Quebec? With la belle province? So valorization is an interesting, oh, you're located in Europe. Oh, of course, okay, so that also makes sense. Good evening in Europe. Valorization is a term that, valorisation in Quebec, it's extracting value, economic, social, environmental value from research. It's not a word that in English Canada we use very often, but it is certainly a word that I've heard a lot in Quebec, and glad to see it's also being used in Europe. Thank you, Annalise. If you could clear that poll. And if you could set up the second poll to just ask you, how do you define this stuff that we do? Like, what do you tell your friends you do at work? And you can type into this poll. It's a free-form answer. Everyone can start typing, and the answers will come up. Just press return or enter when you finish typing. And so you tell your friends that you do research communications. You help research maximizes the usefulness of their work to society. That's great. You help getting research into to those who need it in the best way possible. Research results into action. That's nice and snappy. You could put that on a t-shirt. Learn how best to make sure research evidence is used and benefits of people who can use it. That's great. Facilitating impact. I love that, because we know that facilitation is such an important action, and also knowledge to action. So thanks, Annalise. If you could end that poll. Thank you, everyone, for those who have typed. And if you could clear the poll, we'll go on to the next slide. So I asked that question because I am on record, and now on record again, for not caring what you call it. You can call it whatever you like: mobilization, engaged scholarship, extension, K-STAR, community-based research. I really don't care, because at the end of the day, it is about maximizing the impacts of university research beyond the academy. So how we can help create impacts from research on Canada's, on local and global economies, on society, and on the environment. So I tend to use knowledge mobilization when I'm in my York University space. If I'm working in a NeuroDevNet space, I'm a KT lead for an NCE called NeuroDevNet, or now it's renamed Kids Brain Health Network, then I tend to be a KT space. So I like, I'm bilingual, as it turns out. But this slide shows how you can be multilingual. So here's another example coming from our partners, the Université de Montréal, where the researchers were in the Canadian Bovine Mastitis Research Network. And mastitis is a disease of udders, of cow udders. It's utterly ridiculous. Sorry, just had to throw that in. Matthew's laughing, but it's a good thing he's muted. And Annalise tells me that's my one. And they worked, their partners were the Dairy Producers Federation of Quebec, the Association of Veterinary Practitioners, Velactica Inc., and they worked to produce, the research they did was this tactic, Udder Health Veterinary Kit, funded by NSERC. The knowledge mobilization that they did, they didn't just produce the kit and put it up on the web, say, please buy our kit. They did this facilitated training. They wanted to make sure that this kit got into the hands of the end users, which were the veterinary practitioners. They've trained 340 vets in Quebec. They've Through this work, they've identified a new somatic cell count standard, so that's a policy decision that has created a standard for improvement of milk quality, and it also has the potential to hit a $164 million milk market. So a fairly significant market for as a potential economic impact. Again, going beyond the dissemination to the facilitated training, the uptake of this by the vets, and then the implementation into new policies and into new services. And this is how I describe knowledge mobilization, is that if impact is what we want to have happen, then knowledge mobilization is one of the ways that we do it. It's a variety of services or supports or tools that help community, and by community it's the non-academic community. It could be industry or government or not-for-profit civil society organizations, and we create spaces where they can exchange information or co-create and collaborate together. So in the evaluator's world, if impact is the dependent variable, then knowledge mobilization is the independent variable. It's the thing we change to see an effect on the dependent variable. And I like to say that it helps make research useful to society by supporting engaged scholarship, collaborative research from inception to impact. And that does fit within a tweet. And Annalise can tell you why that's important later on in the discussion. Another example from our work, this from York University. York Region, I should give you a little snapshot. It's the fastest growing newcomer population in Canada. 48% of the people who live and work and play in York Region were not born in Canada, and that's a real strength for the local economy, but it also presents some challenges. So the Human Services Planning Board of York Region phoned us up one day and they said, we need help, we need to do research on how we deliver human services to newcomers. They had done created a new pilot of what they call the Welcome Center through an inclusivity action plan, and they asked us to collaborate on developing, designing, and conducting an evaluation of that. And that evaluation research was published, as you can see here in the research, in the International Journal of Diversity in Organizations, Communities, and Nations. But the knowledge mobilization that we did was we co-produced the research, we produced some policy briefs, and we made presentations to end users. And it was that evidence that we made, that we presented to end users. You can follow that evidence through council minutes. And in the council meeting where they decided to invest $20 million to expand the Welcome Center, they cited the evidence of York University's evaluation. This ended up expanding the Welcome Center from 1 center to 5. It created 86 jobs, and it enabled the Welcome Centers to deliver over 48,000 services to newcomers over 5 years. So we see this as a policy decision, but also a service enhancement based in part on the collaborative research and evaluation that we did with the region. So I'm going to pause and just see if anyone has any stories of impact that they would like to share. Please feel free. You don't have to, but if you've got a story where you of impact, Annalise is going to broaden the chat box, and feel free to come in and tell your story. And we'll just pause for a moment if someone wants to start typing. And if no one starts typing, that's fine, because I've told you 3 of our stories. I think we can pause there. So I'm not seeing any other stories. That's fine, Annalise, if you could minimize that chat box again. Oh, Annalise is typing. And Sylviane is typing. So the Hand-in-Hand project is a project we've been working on in NeuroDevNet, where we're taking evidence around, we're partnered with the Infant Mental Health Project or partnership at the Hospital for Sick Children, and using evidence from research in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders to be able to get fetal alcohol spectrum evidence into early childhood screening and intervention for neurodevelopmental disorders. Is being delivered right now in early childhood centers and in children's aid societies. Oh, thank you. Developmental service plans used by practitioners at children's aid societies. And Sylviane's still typing. Multiple attendees. This is exciting. Melanie's typing. So Sylviane's got the best practice guidelines for pediatric concussion, badly needed as a standard of care, very diverse variations, and written in plain language to help users get through a large document. Thank you, Sylviane. And Melanie Barwick says, do we know the impact of that yet? No, we haven't. That's actually a really good question, is what's the impact of creating developmental service plans by children's aid societies? So we do know that we got to the implementation point where the children's aid societies are using these evidence-informed developmental action plans, and then it is infant mental health promotion will be working with the children's aid societies to do an evaluation to see what the impact of that was on the developmental targets and trajectories of these kids. And Sylviane says there will be an update in 2017, so the results will have been collated. Brock University's typing. This is exciting, except I'm going to ask Brock to be the last one typing because we do need to move on, because you do want to hear what Matthew's going to say. Now he's shaking his head, but he really does actually want to tell you what he's doing. Recent CIHR project scheme grant working with the World Health Organization national partners to develop research plans. So you're still, and dissemination strategies. So that's great. You're starting on that process of working to impact. The dissemination strategies are good, and then disseminating to whom, and how is that going to be taken up by partners, and what will they do with it to implement that evidence into their policies, practices, and services. Melanie's still typing, but we'll move on. And so this is the Research Impact Network, 12 universities across the country who are developing programming for knowledge mobilization. We're under very different organizational constructs. I'll tell you about that. Melanie, it is great people are planning to evaluate impact, and it really is good because so much of the work, especially within the academic setting, has stopped at dissemination, and now we are moving forward with our partners to develop impact. And I'll say with our partners because it's the partners that build and sell products or develop public policies or deliver social services that are making the impact. And so so if we want academic research to have an impact, then we do that by helping our researchers collaborate with their partners from the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. So this is the network. The network mission is that we're going to be build Canada's capacity and knowledge mobilization by developing and sharing best practices, services, and tools. And that's the key of the mission. It's about sharing these tools. We are a community of practice. We work as to be able to share. We've created a space where universities are usually very hyper-competitive with each other. We've created a space of collaboration where we share these tools and services so that York can learn from Wilfrid Laurier, and Wilfrid Laurier can learn from Kwantlen, and Kwantlen can learn from Memorial as examples. So we are about sharing these tools and practices, but we're as institutions. So we support our researchers, but it's important that we are the 12 institutions who are members of this network. We will maximize the impact of university research for social, cultural, economic, environmental, health benefits. So that's what we are here to do, is maximize impacts. This slide says university. I need to update this slide because in October we have opened up the membership to colleges who do naturally applied research seeking to have impact, and also research hospitals. And so I need to update our language. We made a very conscious effort early on to be universities, but we're now making conscious efforts to open up to other members of the post-secondary group. And then our values. I'm going to go through this quickly because I want to get to Matthew. But that we believe academic research contributes to impact on our local and global communities. That it's the university research enterprise. It's all disciplines and scholarship. It's not just STEM, but it's including the social sciences, humanities, arts, design, the natural sciences that don't result in a patent. It's really everything that isn't going to be covered by commercialization. And also that our partners are community, industry, and government. It's not just a focus as Canada's innovation policies have been focused on industry. We'll get to that. We're now focusing more on inclusive innovation. I want you to remember that term, inclusive innovation, because it's going to be coming up. And these are the universities. We have a number of different organizational constructs. We're a central research office, a research partnership office, community-based research. Some of us are focused on economic development, some on public engagement, and some have a policy focus like UNB. And McMaster has a decentralized model where the Faculty of Social Sciences is the lead, but they have embraced a number of offices, including their tech transfer, industry liaison, entrepreneurship office, as well as their Office of Community Engagement. But they do have a lead out of the Faculty of Social Sciences. And I'm just going to pause there. Let's take 2 minutes to see if you have any questions before we move over to Matthew's presentation. If you have a question, please type it in the box. Thank you, Tracy, for typing. And Kathy's typing. We'll just take 3 questions. Tracy, Kathy, and if one more wishes to type a question, that would be great. In your head, just hear the Jeopardy theme song while this is happening. I could sing it, but this is being recorded, and that might sort of have a copyright issue. Matthew's nodding. He could be laughing. Okay, Kathy, what is the Living Lab at Carleton? So the name of the lab is 1125 at Carleton. It's the managing director is Kathy Edwards. And it is, I'm not sure how it reports. I think it reports jointly. It does actually report jointly up into the provost as well as the vice president of research. So 1125 at Carleton. And Tracy, how would you suggest developing KTE relationships for those who are early in their career? That's actually a really good early career. Folks might want to take a look at the training programs that Melanie Barwick runs at the Hospital for Sick Children. You can look up both the SKTT. Melanie, if you could type in the SKTT as the Science Knowledge Translation Training Program, and then also the KT Professional Certificate Program. Melanie will type in those names, and maybe if she can go find a web link, because those are really good ways to see, to build your capacity, to start building your capacity for someone who's early in their career. Matthew, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think you have control to advance the slides, and please turn on your microphone, and I'm going to turn mine off.
How's this? Everybody can hear me? Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I have to say thank you to Annalise and Stacy for organizing this. Thank you to David for inviting me to do this. It's a real honor and a thrill to be with David on a webcast. I feel like I've officially made it now, a webcast with David Phipps on Research Impact. This is the big time. So as the first slide is just the title of the report. I think somewhere closer to the end of this very short slide deck, I only have 4 or 5 slides, there'll be a link to the actual report that the conference board has issued. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a backgrounder on the report and how it came about and what we're doing here at the conference board, just by way of introduction and context. So I work in the Center for Skills and Post-Secondary Education in the Conference Board, which has a 5-year mandate to do about 35 projects looking at national and international themes in post-secondary education, working towards developing a national strategy for post-secondary education. And the center is funded by investors across the spectrum of post-secondary. By some provinces. We've had funding from some federal departments as well to carry out this research agenda. And we're looking at a whole cross-section of projects around access and equity issues for Indigenous students and students with disabilities, and issues around access and equity for gender and women in post-secondary. We've done foundational studies on the state and impact of post-secondary education, the economic impact, the policies, laws, and regulations. I'm spearheading a handful of projects on the financial sustainability of post-secondary, student mobility, so domestic transfer between institutions, social sciences, and humanities. Like I said, there's about 35 projects. We aspire to use these projects which involve, in-depth key informant interviews, large-scale labor market analysis and StatsCan data analysis. We have our own survey tools. Most of our projects involve a surveying, have a surveying mechanism to develop these projects as an evidence based for this national strategy. Now, as David mentioned, we had our big post-secondary education summit last week in Toronto, and I proposed at that event to sort of reset our strategy, to not only have a strategy on post-secondary on how to address all the big themes and issues in post-secondary, from access to financial sustainability, but also to sort of attach to it an action plan. And what we propose, very much inspired by the work of the Research Impact Network, is to develop multidisciplinary collaborative platforms for engagement exchange around the big issue. So not just for us, the conference board, to drop a strategy, say here's where you are now and here's where you need to get to, but actually to convene the right people to actually do that. And David's networking approach, I think, is very much the inspiration there. So this was not one of the projects that was on the original docket because the center is more than halfway through its mandate, and I only arrived about a year ago, but I managed to squeeze it in as one of our case studies. So we did about, of those 20, we did about half of them were international case studies, the other half were domestic case studies looking at a large cross-section of issues in post-secondary. I put this one on because I kind of brought this topic over prior to joining the conference board. I was at the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, and I happened to arrive there right around the time that they were looking to get into the research impact space. And they had been talking to David before I got there, and they were looking to do more work on how to inspire research impact and knowledge mobilization in humanities and in the humanities and social science disciplines. And I did an early working paper there on looking at additional metrics above and beyond bibliometrics that could be used to measure, or not necessarily measure, but that could be used to recontextualize humanities and social science work. So we have questions coming in, and I should mention that I am still a teacher at heart, so I'm used to people interrupting me as I talk, and I encourage you to do that. You can't throw me off. But the goal here was to examine, as I say, and analyze the Research Impact Network. But to do it in our sort of typical conference board way and figure out this isn't just a spotlight study on the impact network, but to actually figure out the key issues, the key takeaways, and to figure out how we can sort of contextualize the work that the Research Impact Network is doing within the larger context of post-secondary education. And so that needed to be the value add here. And so if you take a look at our report, and which I will talk about now, the point that I'm trying to make throughout it is how can we use what David is doing at the Research Impact Network to inform a transformation and shape a transformation of post-secondary education, which is what is part of the conference board's mandate. So for that reason, we looked at the successes and challenges associated with knowledge mobilization in the hopes of contributing to discussions around how Canadian researchers might employ similar strategies in their own post-secondary institutions and community-based organizations. So the report is in some ways a history, and I tend to mention this too often, but a history of, I'm a historian, so I always tend to look backwards before I look forwards, a history of how David and the Research Impact Network got to where they are, and that transition from a loose collective of passionate academics and researchers into an organized network. And so that context is there, and as is an analysis of some key issues. And I wanted to highlight about 4 key issues. So there's 2 here and two on the next slide, as opposed to giving you the background, which probably a lot of you know, and that's why you're tuning into this as it is. But after having done the research, given the background on the Research Impact Network, one of the big takeaways and messages that we wanted to communicate to our stakeholders and to the post-secondary education community in general is that much more needs to be done to invest in institutional supports for knowledge mobilization above and beyond tech transfer, industry liaison, and issues surrounding and initiatives surrounding commercialization. So we really realized through the research that we did that knowledge brokers are play an enormously important role in this process, and that while for 30 years or more prior to the founding of the Research Impact Network, universities were primarily occupied by commercialization and tech transfer. There's a whole lot more knowledge and research on campus that can actually be mobilized, and that was the work that was being done by the social sciences and humanities and health researchers. But one of the things that we really did take away from this research was that this kind of work, or knowledge mobilization, while it can happen organically and it can be wonderful and beautiful, it's not all. That's not that. It can also be taken for granted, and that's not always the best way. So this is not one of these things that we want universities and college campuses and the people who administer them to think, as an afterthought or just will just kind of happen. This is something that I think needs to be integrated into campuses and needs dedicated knowledge brokers on campus. And I talked a lot at our summit about increasing the professionalization of on-campus staff, and I noticed that was one of the points that really resonated with a lot of the people who were at our summit, which had 300 or so people from across the post-secondary education sector. And so often when you look at campuses, we focus a lot on faculty, on senior admin, of course, on every variation of student, but the on-campus staff tend to be neglected, whether it's knowledge brokers or mental health support staff or the career service staff. And part of the solutions that we're suggesting at the Conference Board through our large-scale Center for Skills and Post-Secondary initiative is that we actually need to think a lot more about the on-campus staff in terms of their role in everything from skills training through to career transitions, and of course all the other sort of personal issues that students and on-campus people need support for. So, and we're living, of course, in an era where where we're underperforming, in our skills training and in our innovation output and productivity, and the default answer is usually just to ask researchers or professors to do more and to do more and more of the work. One of the messages we're trying to get across is that perhaps is unfair. There's a whole cross section of other people on our campuses today that could be doing a lot more to support and play instrumental roles, and certainly knowledge brokers on campuses across Canada are one of those people. So from a very practical perspective, the Commons Board is pathologically averse to anything overly risky or too sensational. This is being recorded, right? So I should perhaps be careful what I'm saying. But this, to us, is a very practical solution to increase the productivity and output of faculty and of research on campus, is to devote more time and support to dedicated knowledge brokers. So that's one of the big issues that we're talking about. Connected to that is the second point about university-based researchers benefiting from faculty evaluation criteria that incentivizes high-impact interdisciplinary research in those disciplines on the slide. This is partly, it should maybe in a way be point 2, but this is more personal than for me and than the first point, in the sense that it's what brings me to this topic and what initially inspired me to look at this topic, and that researchers are faculty first and have criteria documents and are incentivized and promoted based on what will actually which boxes they can tick on in their portfolio. And if knowledge mobilization isn't one of those, if research impact isn't one of those, if having impact in your community and doing something other than publishing in peer-reviewed journals and then moving on to the next article isn't one of the things that isn't something that you are rewarded for in your career, then we may be just sort of shouting into the abyss and trying to compel researchers to start doing more. Will I be talking more about evaluation criteria? Yes, this could definitely be a major barrier for faculty, and this is the one for which I received the most blowback, but it's also the one for which I received the most enthusiasm, because I've been talking about this issue and theme for quite a while, because it's certainly among the research impact community or knowledge mobilization community, they would embrace this idea is to actually get credit for doing all the stuff they're already doing, but above and beyond, publishing in a journal. But of course, there's also an old guard of faculty who prefer to just stick with what they're doing and don't want any part of this and view this as part of a movement against what it means to be a professor. And what I'm suggesting in a very calm and cool conference board way is that we really do need to change the nature of academic work. The answer isn't to say that everybody needs to be a knowledge mobilizer and everybody has to have research impact, but we can definitely layer in some of these some knowledge mobilization and research impact metrics into evaluation criteria for faculty as part of the larger rubric for evaluation. And in any scenario where a faculty member may be prolific in one area but not in the other, as long as they're proving their worth and proving their productivity or being productive, then I think we'll be okay there. But you're right. I mean, they are run by our faculty members. Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold here. But I do see this as being one of the hardest things to change, of course, among the recommendations that we have here. This might be one of the hardest one, but I mean, by the same token, the first bullet point is also one of might be easier said than done, because wherever there are opportunities for cutbacks, and I know that there's an increasing precarity, not only in faculty but in on-campus staff. So the first one requires money. The second one doesn't necessarily require money, but what I'm trying to suggest, and as delicately as I can, is that what it means to be a professor it needs to change, not just because of research impact and knowledge mobilization, but in the larger narrative and discussion about post-secondary in terms of increasing our innovation and research output and increasing our productivity or our skills training, then we need different types of professors. We need different types of professors to do that than we have now. We are asking professors who went through an old-fashioned system like David and I did to do new-fashioned things that perhaps they're not prepared to do. We're asking them to have networks that they don't have, or to have business partners that they never needed before. And so this is a role that can be played by knowledge brokers or by other on-campus staff to do that. So this is part of the recommendations. If I was more on the ball, I may have done a poll here, but to ask if anybody sees this as particularly bullet 2 as inherently impossible, or this could actually be done. But it's something that I welcome your feedback on. Yeah. Two, yeah. With them both. Both ideally. I mean, so these recommendations will inform our strategy for post-secondary education. The second point is related to a larger report I'm doing on the changing nature of academic work and the financial sustainability of post-secondary education, where I outline the precarity of our post-secondary education institutions from a financial standpoint. We ran a panel, or I moderated a panel at our summit last week on the financial sustainability of post-secondary education. We had the president of CAUT there, who represents faculty, and said the government needs to kick in more money for post-secondary in order for faculty to maintain their levels of remuneration and benefits. We had the vice president of CABO, the Council of Business Officers for universities, who said they don't anticipate the money will be there. And then we had a president of a college in Vancouver who said we don't have the money, we're doing without it. What I think is, I think the second and third panelists are, perhaps a bit more advanced in their thinking when it comes to this. And what I'm hoping to do through this related report to this one is advance the argument that we need to start rethinking what it means to be a professor, and not just from evaluation criteria, but in terms of the kind of work that they do. So these are two of the big lead-off points, and as a result, in order to sort of prove these 2 points, we used the Research Impact Network as our sort of case study to examine the viability of those two. I mean, we used the Research Impact Network as our case study in order to and we arrived at these conclusions. So we did it in that order, obviously. But the Pan-Canadian Research Impact Network, by supporting and facilitating knowledge mobilization and collaboration among faculty and students and community and industry and in government, very much has its finger on on the pulse of this change that's needed in academic research. And of course, I'm only focusing on the academic side of things because that's our mandate. That's our mandate here. But the new the kind of collaborative platform that David's overseeing through the Research Impact Network is very much the kind of outside the silo thinking that I think academia needs, especially in the social sciences and humanities disciplines. So that is my background, and that's where my sympathies lie. But related to the earlier points, it's very much those disciplines, I think, that need to sort of break out of their old way of thinking. We no longer live in an era of knowledge for knowledge's sake. We live in an era of trying to train students for tomorrow's workplace and to train graduate students to do research to support innovation for tomorrow's world of work and the kind of standards of living that we're not quite sure we'll actually be able to attain. So the Research Impact Network is time for discussion. But the Research Impact Network, I think, is very much a model for the kind of reform that I think needs to happen across the post-secondary sector, in large part because it reduces the barriers, and it's very much these barriers and all the key issues in post-secondary education that are preventing new thinking and that are preventing progress and reform. There's a culture in post-secondary of trying to maintain the status quo. It's just add more money so we can continue to do everything the way we want to, and to incentivize people based on the extent to which they can monetize their work. I think Research Impact Network is going a long way towards showing that there's a great deal more social value, which by default has economic value, but it's harder to quantify by doing things slightly different. I point out that there's 9 of the 12 universities that are not part of the
Great, thank you very much.
The other seats that
and Melanie, thank you for prompting us to move along. We did want to get into some discussions around a couple of related themes.
So maybe in our discussion we talk a little bit about
maybe we'll spend about 5 minutes on these two themes. One is about inclusive innovation, and the other is about the professionalization of on-campus staff. And then we'll save the last 10 minutes for some questions, some Q&A. But there is a question from Kara. How do you see basic research fitting into this, whereas the impact to society might not be immediate? And that's a good question, Kara. I think Matthew did mention that not all research needs to be mobilized. Certainly not everyone with an NSERC Discovery Grant has to file a patent, and not everyone with a SSHRC Insight Grant must be mobilizing to non-academic audiences. But for me, I say that if the research is research is right, if the partner is right, if there is a target, non-academic target is right, and then finally if the researcher is right, because it's about the people and about the targets, then those are spaces where we can step in to mobilize research to try and create impact. But we absolutely need to build any applied research with impact needs to be built on a foundation of good basic traditional scholarship. And a couple of questions are typing. It's about what's appropriate for your research. Absolutely. Okay, so Matthew, this is where Matthew and I get to have a little fireside chat. So imagine there's a fire behind us. And inclusive innovation, this is language coming out of the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada that is reviewing Canada's innovation strategy. And some of these quotes here: innovation is the path to inclusive growth, fosters a thriving middle class with economic, social, environmental possibilities. Mounting concerns about inequity with louder calls to leverage technology for social good. Inclusive innovation success hinges on partnerships and inclusiveness, including governments, private sector, academia, and civil society. And even the Prime Minister says that technology has to serve the human progress, not be a substitute for it. So, Matthew, what do you think about knowledge mobilization, research impact, and what's the intersection with these concepts of inclusive innovation that are coming out of Ottawa?
Well, I might actually make a demographic argument on this one, which might seem less obvious, but what we're seeing is certainly in post-secondary is that there's going to be a demographic crisis moving through the system shortly in terms of a shortage of students. And a lot of the work that we're doing now is to say that the sector needs to, in order to maintain its basic, it's at its basic levels in terms of student recruitment, if not even considering growing post-secondary, not even considering growing our research capacity, we need to start including a lot more people who were otherwise not included before. And so this is, disadvantaged youth, Indigenous students, students with disabilities. So I would almost start there from the post. As I said, a lot of my lens on this is through the post-secondary sector. We need to start including a lot more of the people who weren't involved in post-secondary in the first place, moving them through the system, training them with basic college and undergraduate degrees, but then also and having more Indigenous people, more immigrants.
Let me build on that diversity by saying, in addition to your diversity, this is a new flavor of language of innovation from government. In the previous government, the language of innovation was all around industry and around products and around getting technologies from universities into the hands of industry through commercialization. But we know that Canada's economy in the last 50 years has flipped, and we're now service industries make up two-thirds of the GDP in Canada. And so if universities only work on commercialization of widgets into industry, we're going to be missing all the opportunities for all our disciplines, including the social science, humanities, and the natural sciences and health sciences, to have an impact on sectors, including industry, but also the public and the nonprofit or civil society sectors. So want to move on and ask the audience, Annalise, if you could put up this poll and ask the audience, what do you think of inclusive innovation? Do you think it's just a please click now? Is it another buzzword? Is it a bold vision? Is it something more than commercialization? Is it an opportunity? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you prefer not to say. Is it a nice idea, but it's hard to accomplish linking economic prosperity, social progress, and environmental sustainability? Absolutely. Annalise, if we could end that poll. And we see
this is part of the reform, though, that I think that we're trying to talk about, is that
the highest votes is for it's an opportunity, followed equally by a bold vision. It's finally something more than commercialization. And that's exactly how I feel. I do feel we've got an opportunity to have a conversation with government. Annalise, if you could close that. I do want to move on to this professionalization. Matthew, you talked a little bit about this. I want to do this in about 3 minutes. So we are seeing on campus the growth of types of knowledge broker folks, but we've also seen some literature, especially coming out of Edinburgh, that has talked about the precarity of knowledge brokers. So let's focus our discussion on knowledge brokers and not just all non-academic staff. And Matthew, tell us what your research is showing us.
About the non-academic staff, it's just the research is showing us that we need to end any precarity in the non-academic staff and actually try to find the best way to go about professionalizing these staff in terms of working environment, in terms of their own evaluation metrics. This is part and parcel of the challenge with evaluation metrics in general, is that it's hard to evaluate the work done by knowledge brokers because it's not always the easiest thing to count. I know a big part of the story of the Research Impact Network is that the narrative is as important, if not more important, than the metrics. But part of the professionalization of the staff is that we need dedicated people on campus with actual dedicated job criteria in order to maximize the impact of the knowledge brokers. So through our look and at the Research Impact Network, we saw that in order to join your network, there has to be some kind of dedicated knowledge broker, but that could also take the form of a combination of people who form the equivalent of a knowledge broker, and those seem to be the places where maybe there's, I won't go so far as to criticize or say they were struggling, because we didn't go into that level of analysis, but certainly where there were dedicated on-campus staff for knowledge brokering, people who could who knew the researchers, who knew the community, who could answer the phone, who were literally located in a place on campus where they could, where it made sense and they were in contact with people. And not in a portable out in the back end of campus or something, then these kinds of practical steps towards professionalizing of the staff went a long way, certainly in the UK context.
Thank you. So Annalise has put up another poll asking the participants, what do you think of professionalization? Is it valid? Are we failed academics? Are we grant-supported precarious labor? Are we starting to find our voice? Do we have a head in the academy but our hearts in community? Don't know for what to say. I think we've got a biased audience sample. Although it's interesting, yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, just I want to move on to questions. So Annalise, if you could close that, and we see that many people think it's a valid career path. Many of us say we're starting to find our voice, and some agree. A quarter agree that it is grant-supported precarious labor, and I often see this in grant applications at York University. Do not make your knowledge mobilization dependent on a graduate student working 10 hours a week. These are meaningful roles that need to be meaningfully budgeted for. Excuse me. So I am going to close there. If you could close that, and we'll advance to a Q&A section. Sorry. So thank you, Annalise, for opening up the chat box. If anyone has a question, we've got 8 minutes for questions. Matthew and I are happy to hang around and answer your questions. Hillary's typing, but I know she's having a little side chat with Melanie, which is great. But Hillary, put a question in there. I think that's Hillary Edelstein, but it may not be.
I did want to mention one thing. I wanted to mention one thing I saw in the discussion going on as we were talking. The report from the Conference Board is free.
Okay, so Evo has a question. You talked about the matrix for evaluation. Is this in the paper? Curious about what this might be. I think, Matthew, that's to you. Did you mention the matrix of evaluation?
That's one of our metrics that we use to then make a case for doing more work. No, we didn't go into how that could look. I think that's one of those nuggets that I thought could be almost its own paper, because it doesn't currently exist, and so it wasn't something that we could, that we could
And
actually
if
get
you're
an evidence
interested
base
in
for. I think
faculty
there are,
criteria,
I know that there are
engagescholarship.ca is a link
universities,
that
and
was a
maybe
partnership of
I
10
suspect probably
universities that
colleges too,
looked
where
at
there are,
faculty
where
incentives and reward
where
structures for
these kind of
community
matrices
engaged scholarship. So it's
are
focused just
actually
on
part and
community engaged
parcel of faculty
scholarship,
criteria
led
documents. That
by
to me
the
is a
University of
whole other
Guelph
project.
under their College for Applied and Human Sciences. Sylviane, I agree face-to-face communication produces best results. She works long distance with all her clients. They're all in different sectors. Academics are accustomed to working remotely, even internationally. Can you comment on why you think knowledge brokers should be physically embedded in departments and faculties? I certainly think that, the research impact model is to have on-campus knowledge brokers. It is probably not the only model. I know there's a lot of work underway in the knowledge mobilization translation literature about the use of online technologies as brokering spaces. So I think that knowledge brokers should not necessarily be physically embedded. If they are, that's one model, but I do think there is room to explore virtual or explore the use of online tools to be able to do some of that brokering. Hillary asks, when considering the impact of research and integration into practice, in what ways can universities do more work with professors to encourage how research findings trickle into practice and policy? So I would say, Hillary, that one way that universities can think about it is to read Matthew's report and to look at how knowledge brokers are being used as support services to faculty. One thing that we don't base the model on, but we recognize that universities have for many years invested in professional supports for commercialization, industry liaison, and now increasingly entrepreneurship. So we're saying that type of professional support, it's not 10 hours a week by a graduate student. It's got to be supportive of your faculty or of your school or of your institution, hence the professionalization of these functions. At the end of the day, the knowledge mobilization is going to sit and happen within the research project. So I'm not going to do your knowledge mobilization for you, but I'm going to provide tools and supports and services to help you build your capacity to do knowledge mobilization within the research project, both as integrated KT and as end-of-grant KT. Matthew, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just add that I think before all that can happen, that the motivation has to be there for it. And one of the things that, one of our takeaways from doing the research for the report was just that there is a younger guard of faculty who are coming up through the system who aspire to mobilize the work.
And if I could just add quickly, they're coming into a world of engaged scholarship, because every SHIRT grant has to have a knowledge mobilization strategy. Every CIHR grant has to have a KT strategy, and that wasn't the case 15 years ago. So new faculty members are coming in. Our impact strategy, and this is another webinar, the national policies around impacts and drivers. In Canada, it's driven by the grant application. And I'm going to pause it there. Annalise is typing to tell me to pause. I'm sure she's saying that. And to move on, because I do want to thank, if Annalise, could you advance the slide? Or, right, Annalise, there we go. So would just like to thank the Conference Board of Canada, Matthew, and Annalise and Stacy, who supported this technically from Kids Brain Health Network, Melanie for being moderating and introducing us in the Research Impact Network, and York University. And then just the last slide, we do have, oh, we don't. Okay, we do have an evaluation. This will be sent to everyone, but I do have to share with you. Oops, that's not right. Where's my webinar link? There we go. Okay, so here's the link to the evaluation. When you get the email, if you just click on that link, there's something wonky with it. And if you click on that link, it's actually going to take you to something that might not get you to the website, because it's got a bunch of percent signs after it. So just remove that, go back to the word research-impact, and you will get to the web link. Okay, so thank you very much. Matthew, thank you very much. Always a pleasure presenting with you. Thank you, everyone. Oh, Melanie says the link above works. Great. Thank you, Geraldine. I really appreciate everyone. Thank you from New Zealand, Sarah Metcalf. Wow, it's got to be, well, no, it's probably tomorrow morning in there. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, Matthew. Thanks, Annalise and Stacy. Thanks, Melanie.